All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the League Express podcast. My name's Jake Kieran, and joining me as always is the editor of League Express, Martyn Sadler. And again, Martyn, we're in a different environment, a different place, and we've got a special guest with us here.
A very special guest, actually. It's Derek Beaumont, the owner of Leigh Leopards. We're delighted to welcome him onto the podcast. Great to see you, Derek. We're actually at your business HQ, which is this is Worsley, isn't it, near Manchester?
Yeah, well, that's the posh postcode. We're probably near a farm if I walked in, but
right,
the actual official one is Worsley, Martyn.
Right, great. Well, it's great to be here anyway, and you've got a wonderful collection. You know, the audience can't see it, but you've got a fantastic collection of rugby shirts and football shirts, because you're not just a Leigh Leopards fan and owner, but you actually are a Manchester United fan, aren't you?
Yeah, so, for my sins, but
yeah, well,
it's well, we got the FA Cup and rescued the season a little bit, didn't we? But yeah, I've got a bit of a passion for Man United, but I'm more a rugby man.
Well, I'm glad you bought Leigh and not Manchester United, mate.
Well, can you imagine? I'd probably last about half an hour in that environment. The money that those guys get through. Interestingly enough, this room is more known for things it does around rugby, probably.
Yeah.
And the sort of hub of making all those packages and things, which you can see the remains of over there in boxes and paper.
Yeah. Well, it's great to be here, as I say, and actually, you are originally a Leigh lad, aren't you? You I think were you born in Leigh? Did you come up through Leigh schools and so on? Because we wanted to sort of get to the bottom of why you became a rugby league guy and ultimately what made you buy the club. You know that. So we'd like to just explore your history a bit, I think.
So I was actually born in Old Hospital, which is
in Salford. That's where my wife was born, oddly enough.
Yeah. There we go. We got
something in common.
Yeah. Good job she didn't bump into me, I guess, today.
Absolutely.
And then my early days were spent in Little Alton. I had two brothers. I'm the oldest. My mum was a single parent. She had me at 18, so at 21 she had three kids on her own in a council estate. Bit of a tough environment. So I suppose tough environments bring tough people.
Yeah.
In many ways, but I was fortunate enough that my mum met a guy over in Leigh. Actually, my auntie had a pub in Leigh, the Bowling Green, and she used to work behind the bar for her there. So very often they'd come and grab a last minute if somebody didn't turn in, and we'd get carted along to sleep there, which was a great adventure because my cousins had all the games.
Yeah.
And, we didn't have a great deal. So that's kind of how we then transitioned to Leigh, I think, when I was about 7. And I went to a school up in Irefold, which is a tougher area of Leigh, a junior school called St Gabriel's, which ironically is no more. And that's where I first started playing rugby.
I can't imagine that you were not able to take care of yourself, Derek, though. You know, in a tough environment.
Well, no, I mean, you'd no choice really, and you just went out there and played, didn't you? And I can never have my head shaved because, unfortunately, I haven't gone bald because there's a lot of stories in there that make me look like a bit of a horror comic. So unfortunate that my dad had good hair and it's been passed down.
Yeah. That's great. And so you started playing rugby as a 7-year-old. Is what you were saying?
Yeah, just through school.
Through school, not through a local junior club.
No, just through school. So rugby league. In fact, I don't even recall. We must have had a football team, but I don't recall anything about it. I was just into sort of tough things. I mean, we used to play cocky rusty on the playground, which people probably familiarise that name as bulldog. So basically, one man's in the middle. I always wanted to start in the middle defending.
And tackle
everyone
the other
runs
guys.
through, yeah. And the more you bring down, the more you've got on your side bringing people down.
I played that game many times as a kid.
Yeah. And I was always getting patched up for diving on the concrete and stuff like that. So I just liked anything that was a physical encounter. They used to have the bizarre thing where you call somebody a cock of the year.
Yes. I'm old enough to remember that as well, mate.
Yeah.
Who was the cock of the school? That sort of thing.
Yeah, so there was always that element, and I think just from that sort of environment, I was never massively. I'd never been one who wanted to go and find fights, but I never kind of backed down to them at school in those days. So I was always someone who could take care of myself. Yeah.
But did you actually play rugby league seriously as a kid? Did you graduate to playing for a town team or anything like that?
So we had the Leigh Town team. St Mary's that I went to as an high school was a really good rugby school. So we played in the English schools quite a number of times. I remember trialling for Lancashire from that, and we had a player called Darren Flanagan, who was like a monster of a guy at our age group, bald head, just good runner, high knees, tough. And when they announced the people who'd got through and was announcing the team, and he got named at number 2 on the wing, I knew my name wasn't coming out.
Were you a winger yourself?
No. I played hooker, but I was really small at school. I only developed later. I mean, I played with people like Mick Blakely, who went on and played for Lee, Mark Sarsfield. There are a couple that spring to mind that kind of made it on further. But I was kind of just gutsy, like tackling, and was always prepared to get my legs into the back row of the other side. And of course, back in the days, it was your head go feed and then head hand feed. So we'd end our sets kicking out where the ball bounced before it went into touch. It always started with a scrum, and I'd generally get the ball back. So whenever we played a team that was onto that, there'd be plenty of loose hands in the scrum, and I'd get a good one on the conk, take me out of the game.
Yeah. So you never had ambition to play the game, beyond that?
I did, but if I'm honest with you, it's a tough game, innit? And you get found out when I think that sort of age, when you become like, 15, 16, and I hadn't really gone through puberty then. I was a real late developer. That was after school. And pretty much everybody else had. And I remember we toured south of France and got absolutely smashed all over the place, if I'm honest. And I ended up with this finger pointing the other way. I had an operation out there, came back, it was in a cast, and I never really went back. I didn't have the desire, if I'm brutally honest.
No.
After that, I think it knocked it out of me. And I kind of got into more hanging around with the girls, stupidly smoking and drinking and that kind of
In other words, you were a normal young guy.
Yeah.
Fairly normal anyway.
In that day and age, for sure, yeah.
But we're sitting in your business premises now, Derek, and obviously you've built up a very successful business. How did you, from being a young kid in your late teens to where you are now in business terms, how did that develop?
Long journey. I mean, essentially, when I left school, I went into an apprenticeship doing hairdressing.
I can't imagine you doing that, mate.
No. I think without, being sort of sounding a bit of an idiot in saying it, I think whatever I was going to do, I was going to be certainly the best version of what I could be at doing it. Yeah. But most likely the best in that, and anything that I didn't feel like golf, for example, no good at, so stop playing it. Anything that I can't be really good at or the best at, I'd find something that I could. And I was really good at that. It was just never kind of for me. My mum and dad had their own business doing double glazing. And I kind of always had the gift of the gab and got over onto the sales side where you could earn money. And there was a long sort of path to it. And I kind of always believed in sales and marketing, and really where it all changed was I got banned from driving foolishly. We all have these things when we're a young kid. Very slightly over the legal limit. That was 35. They prosecuted 40. I believe 41, and learnt my lesson in my early 20s. Never fell foul again, and that left me where, because I couldn't drive. I couldn't go out direct selling. I went working with my uncle fitting roof lines. And he was just basically working for a guy that put a little advert in the paper and then had him doing all the work, and he was just selling them. Yeah. And I was like, why don't we do this? And that was really where it kind of got born from, working in a bedroom, building. Yeah. And it hasn't all been plain sailing, of course. Lots of setbacks. Had to sell cars to pay people, and lots of tough times to get to the good ones.
It doesn't sound all that different to Matthew Ellis's journey, the owner of Wakefield Trinity. Yeah. His family started incredibly small. I was having a chat with him a few weeks ago and built up, and obviously now massively successful. Yeah. And it's the story of a lot of business, isn't it?
Yeah. They take a lot of time, and the longer you go in at something, the easier it becomes in many respects. But you've got to overcome the setbacks. You've got to have the vision. I mean, my parents' business in the end that went out of business, and they split up, and one thing and another. I went off working for people, and then always thought I could do something better myself. And you've always got to work a lot harder than anybody else. And probably the hardest part of becoming a business of the size that this is, and there's significantly bigger ones, and I could be bigger than this, but in life everybody has comfort zones, and people who work for me in sales have comfort zones, and you try and push them outside of that. But the key is delegating and accepting that.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you have it in your organisation with your paper where you let somebody else write something you might feel you could write better.
Indeed,
but you can't write everything. So
yeah.
I always liken it to, if you're playing every instrument, you might be able to play every instrument better than somebody else, but you can't play them all at the same time. So you're going to make a better sound with people playing them not as good as you, but playing them collectively. And then the real key to growth is replacing yourself. So whatever you're good at, replace yourself with somebody as close to as good as you are, so you can move on to something else. And keep on doing that.
I'm sure there's been a few of my match reports, Martyn, you've looked at and thought, I could do a better job than Jake here, or you've had to rewrite parts, mate. So
not just some of them, mate.
It's all coming out now.
No, I'm only joking, obviously.
But just on your hairdressing, mate, was there any ever a point or time where you've had a hairstyle or a haircut that you're embarrassed when you look back at?
For myself, pretty much every one of them. I mean, I think you can tell my mum couldn't afford to take us to the hairdressers when I was a young kid because I got that definite base and haircut. But a couple of embarrassing ones was a big sort of blonde quiff over to one side, do the streaking cap, and then the old top perm. You don't see them these days. They tend to do it at the back.
No. You could almost do a leopard print sort of hair dye in there, surely. Mate.
Oh, man, I leave that to Shanley Bass, our super fan. He owns that one. But ironically, one of our sponsors, Atico, Gary Pollitt, who sponsors Lackland Lamb, he was, I was in college with him back in those days, and nobody knew anything about the hairdressing thing. Not that I was embarrassed about it. And, there was always an association back those with any male that was an hairdresser was homosexual. That never bothered me either. I mean, I've a son who openly he's a big makeup artist. But I remember going, sponsoring a game just before we took over it when I first opened the business, and we got some Leigh players in to open it because it was like, who's famous in Leigh? Well, pretty much nobody other than rugby players. And, so we got a couple of guys down. Kev Ashcroft was the commercial manager at the time. He organised it. And he said, in return, sponsor the game, which was the day after, which shows even then how desperate you were for trying to get sponsors for the game. And we rocks in, and I'm at this table, and then the next thing, Gary comes over, and Gary's got a wife and kids, but he's been in it all that time, so he can't seem a bit in touch with his feminine side. And he comes over, he's like, "Ooh, hey, Derek, remember me?" And I was like, yeah. And he's like, we went to hairdressing college together. And I was like, oh, God, you let it out of the bag, So, that was the first job. But I never inflicted any bad haircuts on anybody else.
No. Were you a Leigh Rugby League supporter when you were a younger guy? Or did you come to support the club later?
So,
in your life?
In all honesty, when I was at St Gabriel's, where I first played rugby, there was a teacher that was influential on me there called Mr. Kane, who ran the rugby side of it, and I liked St Helens. I guess it was the rugby they played. Maybe I saw more of that. Back then, the only sport you saw was on BBC and on
Grandstand. They were more glamorous, weren't they? Let's face it.
And you that's what attracts you. And it's the same for young kids now. And I remember drawing a red V with a felt tip on my white PE shirt, and then he made it a little bit better for me because couldn't have that one. So you then sort of, as you're introduced more in, I remember playing at Hilton Park, but on the training ground, which B&Q's now been built on, in the schools competition. I never got to play on Hilton Park because we got knocked out in the first round. But then that was my first introduction to that. And then, you go, my parents didn't take me there. They didn't really have an interest. And I played for Bedford Rex, which I found out recently. Brian Beaumont, our president, who's passed away, recently also played there, which I didn't know, and a few other people. So that was kind of where the interest in Leigh came, and going watching Leigh. And then that subsided for a while until we was in Tilsley in a pub that my parents had, or my mum had, and a guy came in a Leigh shirt, and that's where he was heading, and I jumped in the taxi with him and got back into it.
But at some point, I think Leigh were probably going through one of their periodic financial crises, and it was somebody's bright idea to have a word with you and say, "Can you come on board and help?" Is that how you came to be involved with Leigh in an official capacity?
Kev Ashcroft,
right?
Kev Ashcroft, he's the one who deserves the pain for the millions that's gone. No, I mean, it's been great. But yeah, Kev was the commercial manager at the time, and after that first time that I referred to when Gary came over, he was in my office on the Monday. Well, how did you like it? He was a good guy, Kev, good stories, good salesperson, really. I ended up giving him a job working for me. So he then got us on the sleeves of the kit, and then was always there, come doing this, come doing that. And then he was telling me stories about... he was very nervous about some Wigan. Mike Nolan was the chairman at the time. And, there was the guy, I don't want to be disrespectful by calling him of a nickname that he was known as, but he was a singer over in Wigan, and there was talk of him taking over the bars, which the late Tommy Coleman was trying to keep on hold of, and there was this kind of thing I was being told about, and that the club couldn't go anywhere. There was Grundy Hill Estates, who had Orwich RMI Football Club at the time, and talk of the new stadium. There was all these sort of moving pieces, and I was kind of, I guess, in a little bit guided by that. And there was a certain sum of money at the time, 225 grand needed to take the club forward. I didn't have that back then by any stretch of the imagination, but I thought, well, just because it's too big for me, surely I can get a group of people that collectively we can do that. And that was where we got the consortium, which I put two shares in, and Phil Coffey and a number of other people that got us to take it on in that capacity.
Right. And then, of course, Hilton Park ultimately, disappeared, and Leigh Sports Village came along. Was that?
Yeah.
That's a big thing for this club, isn't it? For Leigh, because I mean, it's a terrific venue. It's a top class venue, I would say, in every way. It's about the right size for a club of your, drawing power, at least as it is at the moment. That must have been massive for you, and it was a very cooperative local authority, I think, wasn't it? I mean, it was Lord Peter Smith, I think, the
late Lord Peter Smith,
sorted that stadium. Had a great role in putting it together. I mean, obviously, don't know the details.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Peter sadly passed away. He was a very passionate supporter of the club and the town. He's actually, interestingly enough, the only Lord to have come from Leigh. He would often message me personally, in particular times of trouble when things weren't going great. He wasn't somebody who really was that bothered about the success, or I'm sure he would have been elated to have seen the Challenge Cup situation, but he'd message me more so when he knew I'd be at a low privately, which I always find really encouraging. But he was obviously a massive part in that stadium. Trevor Barton is a local person who's steeped from Leigh Miners Rangers, was a massive influence in that as well. And there was strong opposition. I never met the guy, somebody who was labelled swampy, who was into all the ecological stuff and how and why this shouldn't go forward. But we was in a dilapidated stadium in Hilton Park.
It was, wasn't it?
I always remember when we got Emirates on board, which myself and a guy, Mike Callahan, who was the commercial manager at the time, and we'd actually done I'd given up and done it. I shouldn't say given up because it's disrespectful, but I accepted that we needed to stick with the local. I wanted a bigger brand, but I accepted we hadn't got the answers, and we went with WK Sharrott's, which was a wrought iron, big business in the town. And the following morning, came in, and it came through on the fax machine, and there was a connection between somebody from Leigh and Emirates, and this guy had kind of said, yeah, we'll do that. But I didn't want to go back on the word I'd done with Keith, the guy who owned Sharrett. So we took a wing on it and put them on the collars and something on the roof of the stadium and named the stadium the Emirates. And of course, the press, and this is not a criticism because you guys have got an important role to play within all sports. They came, I think Emirates was being built for Arsenal, brand new stadium, and they came and took pictures of the worst parts of Oulton Park with all the rubble outside, and then they faced off the two. So that wasn't a great start for the relationship with Emirates. So,
no.
But it did put into perspective why we needed to get such a great facility, which is the hub now of fantastic for elite female sports as well. When you look at, we had the Euros Women's Football Championships there. We've got the Women's Leopards first team now. There's a Man United women's play there. There's the Cycling Tour of Britain women's race that's been there. So, it's really a great facility that puts our town on the map.
No, absolutely.
No doubt about it, yeah.
And just on the women's, it's exciting watching their development and, I guess how much are you guys investing in their team and their game at the moment? Yeah,
I mean, the big win there really for the club in a couple of ways, not just the women's side, but the recent announcement on the Elite Academy a few weeks back was that, Kieran Perle, the introduction of him as a quality individual.
I think you've got a very smart guy there, haven't you? Kieran Perle has always impressed me as somebody with an incredible analytical brain.
Yeah, he's a very smart lad.
Yeah.
He and not just on rugby side, in terms of like what he stands for as a person, his morals, his ethics, his values, how he conducts himself. He played for the club. His career was cut. He was a very good player, but his career was cut short with an injury. I think it was to his knee. He went coaching assistants over at St Helens. He's worked under a lot of knowledgeable coaches. He's coached at our club as an assistant, as an head coach in Super League, then gone back to Super League. So he's steeped in it all, but his overriding thing he's always had a desire and passion about has been the kids and developing that area of it. He's got his own kids that play in it. So in terms of getting Kieran in to head up the youth, I wanted to build the structure and foundations to get the academy, having been turned down. And it was a case of show what we can and will do. And that was the first block, but it needed to involve him in the rugby side as well. So the thing with that was, listen, I want you to, as well as doing that until you get it, I want you to drive the women's team. I want to start a women's team. I want to develop it. I want to get it in Super League. I want to grow that area of the business. And he's done an outstanding job that I can't speak highly enough. And probably if you look back on recent scores. If you look back at the Bradford game, they just recently won 60-odd nil away at the beginning of the women's team, which was last season. So we're only a season and a half into this inception. I think it was the first away game, and I recall going watching, and Emma Knowles kicked a goal to get a draw. At the end, I can't remember. It might have been 18-all, something similar. It was a low-scoring game. So to in less than 18 months to then go and post 60-odd points,
terrific, isn't it? Yeah.
Away is a massive. And it was just unfortunate, but everything happens for a reason. Last year, they just lost out at a game that probably me trying to create a big event for them as a reward at LSV probably didn't play into our hands when we played Barrow and Featherstone, and then ended up losing the playoff game over
and
at
not
York.
Getting into the Super League.
So that's a minor setback, but it might have actually helped us in terms of the development.
Blessing in disguise in a way. But just going back to you and the Leigh Club, when did you become the owner of the club? When did that happen?
So in the beginning there was obviously the 10 of us, and the shares were kind of split amongst that. I then left the club. My business was failing as a result of all my time into that kind of, when you feel like you've achieved something and then it's where do you go with that. So getting into Super League in 2005 and just being kind of beat, I felt like there was nowhere to go. And I came away from it, and I did a deal with the late Arthur Thomas, whose son Darren was on our board, and at the time Arthur was heavily involved at St Helens. He came out of that through the Eamon and Mark kind of rising of that, and invested into Leigh, and I did a deal with Arthur that took my shares and my director's loans that enabled him to take it somewhere, and he invested heavily and looked after the club in a real good way during a time when there was no promotion and relegation.
Right.
And unfortunately, he passed away, but part of that deal was an handshake that if it became a burden on him or his family, the deal would be reversed that I did with him.
Right.
And when he did pass away, his son Darren came seeing me and told me that his dad had told him that, and I was actually amazed. The ears stood up on the back of my neck, and I was like, I didn't really want to be involved at that time.
No.
I always had an aspiration to go back, but not then, which was 10, 11 years ago in 2013. And I said, listen, man of my word, I did say that to your dad. That was the deal, and we reprocessed it. So I guess at that point then I had the majority shareholding beyond the 50%. And then just recently coming into the rebrand as part of the investments that I'd made and manoeuvring some of that and writing loans off and things. Some of it is to shares with support of the shareholders from back when that was set up. That's now where I own 99 something percent, so kind of really own the club, I guess.
So you've owned it effectively for 10 or 11 years?
Yeah, since 2013.
Well, you're a very competitive guy, Derek, aren't you? And that's very obvious. And, when you took ownership, the club was sort of challenging and trying to getting into Super League, but not able to last. You were in a year at a time, so to speak, when promotion and relegation came back. I can imagine you must have found that really frustrating. And you decided to take radical action and rebrand the club and give it a complete new lease of life. When did you actually conclude that that's what you needed to do?
Do you know what? I think when we did the bid, remember when Toronto kind of pulled out or
in 2020
wasn't renewed, yeah. And they did the application through, I think Lord Jonathan Kane chaired a panel. And myself and Mike Latham largely, and with my wife doing all the marketing of the booklet, put together the bid. And to do that, we absolutely, did a root and branch analysis of every aspect of the club, and it taught me so much. It was phenomenal.
People ought to do that more often, didn't they? Sometimes you just let things drift along if you're not careful.
100%. And when you actually really have a good look into it and listen to those people that are doing those areas of the business that not necessarily you don't think is important to them, you just take for granted. And then you realise that you could actually help them and make them better and interlink everything. And looking at it, it was dysfunctional because it hadn't always been known as Centurions, obviously. That came about from, the I think 1995. And then it was kind of spelt wrong, and then the logo had been tinkered and changed about with. I didn't realise we'd been called the Burrs. Previous to that for a short period of
I didn't know
a year or two.
Either.
So it had been messed about. And whilst I thought the people who'd be most upset would be the older generation, actually they weren't, because they never really bought into Centurions.
No.
It was the younger ones who'd only ever known it as that, who thought I was tinkering with something I shouldn't have done. So I guess when I looked at that, I looked at, the kind of gladiatorial aspect. Now, I know there's no leopards in Leigh, by the way. But, I didn't make sense of the gladiatorial thing. And then we've got a pig as the mascot. So nothing really made sense. And the overriding thing is the factual reason commercially why I made the decision was because I feared that IMG would be coming into looking at this and that they would get all clubs, in other words, to take everybody off the train carriages and then realign them based on everybody going through the process of the kind of bid we did, because that was a proven mechanism. And I felt that everybody would do that, and then they would look at numerous aspects in terms of commerciality, your fan base, all the various things that they've kind of put into this scoring thing, and other things, the geographical elements, and then say, these are the clubs that we're going to put in Super League. I thought it'd be 14, and I was seriously concerned that why would we fit into that? So I sat outside of it and looked that if I was in that job, why would I pick Leigh? Well, I wouldn't, because we was just an imitation of Wigan.
A small town team.
We was an imitation of Wigan. And people argue that, we was the original Cherry and Whites. It might well be the case, but they're going to deal with what's in front of them now. And Wigan's a club with an immense history, which we also have, but in terms of success, a massive club. The kits look similar. They've got a warrior, we've got a gladiator, so that's similar. Everything was very similar. We're close to each other. Why wouldn't you just pick one of those and then we move on to a different area? And the same could have been said, about Hull and different areas. But we know that you can't look at it like that.
No, you can't. No.
But nonetheless, I still had that fear, and I thought we need to distance ourselves from that. We need to distinguish ourselves as an individual identity. And ultimately, you referred to it earlier, we've got a stadium that's the right size of what we are, and that we can fill. And without being disrespectful to our neighbours, Wigan, their huge success, despite that, can only really... I know they filled it when they play Saints, big derbies, but as an average crowd, it's kind of a 50% thing. Some I'm sure they want to try and change, but even at football in the Premier League, it's a tough gig, that size of stadium. So it has its benefits in terms of your playing service, etc. I think we've nailed it because we get that through the United link, but we've got a 10,000, 11,000 capacity stadium that we can fill more regularly. And then in terms of the broadcaster and everything looking at it, that looks like the real deal with everything that we add to it.
Did you ever have any doubts through that rebranding process that, hang on, maybe we're doing something bad here, or did you ever regret or have any doubts throughout that process?
No, I'm a big sayer on regret the things you do and not the things you don't. I spent a lot of time with it. Did I get everything right? 100% not. But I spent a long time with it. So when we took our fans through the process, had gone through all the different logos that we'd looked at and considered, the blank canvases, the different colours, all the different opportunities. I knew it would be resented in the beginning, and it would.
Well, people don't like change, do they?
No,
generally.
No. And the thing for me was, I felt that when we did it, we took so many things in at the same time. So it wasn't just changing the name; it was changing many things. So it was changing the way people can become members instead of season ticket holders, the way they can pay interest free on direct debits. It was bringing high quality players in. So they might like the logo and not the name. They might like the name, not the logo. They might like none of it, but they're happy with signs Zach Hardacre and Ricky Latelli, which incidentally, both those two people being announced that night, which hadn't broke, went straight over everyone's heads. And everyone was just going on about, Leigh Leopards, what has he done? And people saying, I'll never wear leopard print. And I'm like, well, you have wore leopard print, because at the Summer Bash when we played at Leeds against Fev, the Summer Bash kit had the leopard print in black and red shoulders where I was testing, and that was a massively successful kit. So there was a number of things that I subtly put in there to see. So I didn't do it completely naively and blind. I believed in it, and I trusted certain people in and around it who kept it quiet. Finally having to go to the RFL for approval, and they also loved it. And I suppose the one that really made me know I'd got something was when it was all done and we was going to present it, and I rang Brian Carney up and said, I want you to be the person that outs this. And he was like, you're doing that? And I went, I said, what's your opinion of that, hearing it? He went, I love it, this is magic.
I was there that night, Derek, and it was a great night. He handled it really well, did Brian, didn't he?
He's a great pro. In fact, he was actually the person who we presented it differently than I'd intended. He came in, sat looking at what he was going to do. He spent all day going through it with me, and then he was like, I think actually you give the backstory and then announce it rather than announce it and justify it. And that was very smart of him.
That was. There's no doubt about it. I thought that night went really well. And, I mean, obviously, you're never going to get people accepting change immediately. It always takes time to sink in. We were talking recently to Jason Hurst at Bradford, and he was saying that, when they changed the name to the Bulls in 1996, he hated it, for quite a while until he saw it working. And that's the point, isn't it? You've invested a lot into this rebrand, and I think the fans, I'd be very surprised now if any fans didn't think it was a great idea, given where we are in 2024. And of course, winning the Challenge Cup last year must have helped in that regard.
Huge. I mean, that's the catalyst of everything.
Yeah.
Adrian has a saying, winning takes care of everything. And
there's no doubt about it.
We when we started, round 1 we lost, round 2 we lost, round 3 we went away and just won in the last minutes against Ulkey. In fact, the last team to have beaten them there. And then from there, I think we won something like 9 games, including beating Saints at home. And that then... everybody's buying into it.
Yeah.
I'm smart enough to know if we'd have gone 9-10 games unbeaten and Lancashire at the bottom, it would have been an absolute mess calling it the Leopards what we're doing. So I'm well aware of what we do on the field is the most important part of it. But I just think the opportunities that it's created are massive. You know, I mean, like the cycling shirts we've just had at the event for the cycling that came to town. Huge success around that, and you can just have a blank canvas of different colours, and people know if it's leopard print, you can associate it to Leigh. You don't need to put the badge on. You don't need that badge on the clothing. People then know, but other people can buy it because it's not got a badge on. It can just be a fashion item for them.
Yeah, there's a matter of interest though. Going right back to first principles. What made you pick leopards as opposed to, say, Leigh Lions or Leigh whatever else it might have been? Well,
I mean, obviously, being a journalist and an editor, you immediately pick up on the literal of LL.
Course, yeah.
So Lions, the obvious one, being Swinton Lions. So whilst I've learnt out since there is a French division team that's got the name Leopards, I didn't know at the time. Yeah, so I wasn't aware at the time, but it worked literally. But the real reason was, I just have a massive love of leopards. I'm into conservation, into safari.
You go to South Africa quite a bit, don't you?
Yeah, I go a lot, and we do a lot with conservation, more so around the rhino population, which is in danger. We've actually got a place over there that we bought that was called Leopard Rock.
Right.
That we're rebuilding. We've taken that down and we're rebuilding it and keeping the name. So the leopards was a thing. But do you know where the seriousness came about it? And I do have a crack on social media and I like it, and it's tongue in cheek. Yeah. And I don't take anything personal when people crack into me. I just think it's not everybody gets it, but I just find it a bit of fun and banter, and I use it for promoting charities, promoting the club. But somebody had put a picture of me wearing an half leopard print D&G top, going over applauding our fans when they'd been great, and put, what on earth is a 50-odd-year-old man doing wearing leopard print, which I thought was funny, right? Yeah. And I think I replied to the guy saying, a 53-year-old man, what are you on about? I'll have the whole team and crowd wearing leopard print. And then Karen, who was the GM at the time, went, oh wait, and that created quite a bit of a stir. Yeah. And then she was like, would you do
publicity,
it?
Isn't
Absolutely.
It? That's the point.
Yeah. And then when she said, would you do it? And I was like, well, I'm kind of a long way down the process of thinking of it. And then you start to see what they say. And I suppose one person, Mike Latham, who's a club historian and steeped in history and a journalist himself, who I know you've got a good relationship with, I kind of thought he would be the one that would not oppose it, but give me some thought processes on why we shouldn't do it. And he also loved it and thought it was time for a change. But that tweet, whoever did that could take a bit of credit, because it was like, go, let's do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And how important, you touched on it a little bit earlier, but that early recruitment you did with the rebranding, obviously you brought in a heap of players over the last couple of years, but how important was it for them to buy into the rebranding, and then obviously the success they had on the field we touched on? But
yeah, I think that newness enabled it, if I'm honest, because every club has its skeletons in its closets and has its stigmas and things that you can look at and think of, and in terms of players looking at it, in terms of agents looking at it, it was something new. So it was a new opportunity. It was a rebirth. It was, this is what we're going to say. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to change. We've got the facilities. This is the kind of image that we're going to portray. And they actually found it exciting. Interestingly enough, the most important part of the recruitment really was when me and Jutesy went and met Chris Chester and kind of got him in there as a respectful role. Yeah. Because in terms of me as an head of rugby, which I was facilitating that role at the time, whilst I had good relationships with the agents and stuff, my knowledge isn't anything like that of Chris Chester, who's playing and coached at the levels, whilst Dukes he had, and I lean on him a little bit in terms of getting that respect. from someone like Adrian as a coach, which was the next vital piece in the cog. And we was just patient with not having a coach, knowing that if Chris had to, he would do it, knowing that we didn't have as many players as we needed, but we'd wait and get the right ones. It was nervy, but that was key, and is key to any club.
I mean, Adrian's been a really important part of what you've done in the last few years, obviously. And how did you... I mean, he had that year at Wigan, didn't he, which was a disappointing year for him, really, I would think. Mainly, I think, because one or two of his key players were missing for most of that year. And it took a lot of criticism for what looked from the outside like a fairly unadventurous style of play. Mm-hmm. But when he left Wigan, you moved in fairly quickly, I think, didn't you, to sign him for Leigh?
Yeah. And, sometimes you could be guilty of what you read and what you hear and what you listen to. And actually, to be fair, a lot of people in the sport who are journalists have decent opinions, so why wouldn't you? I obviously watched rugby and watched Wigan, and it didn't look that great in terms of attack, but it was still solid. I think they still made the grand final, and but a club of that standard, it's almost like looking at United. There, where winning the FA Cup isn't good enough if you finish so far down the league. So I think there was an element of that, but I always knew that. I had trust Chessy's thoughts, but I always knew, Adrian, how he'd been as a player, and that you don't make a grand final no matter what team you've got unless you've got a way of galvanising a group and being a good coach. So, Adrian would only do a 1-year deal anyway, and I thought, well, that suits because there's not a lot to lose. He always believes that he'll be better at the end of a year than he is at the beginning of the year, so his worth will always increase. That's a good trait to have as a person, because as a coach, you're not risking injuries where you need that security. So it felt very safe. To be fair to Adrian, he backed himself in terms of, it was more him interviewing me, if I'm honest, because he wanted to know what my ambitions were, what I was prepared to invest, where I wanted to go, how I was prepared to do it. For him to put his name into it.
He's a very cool guy, isn't he, Adrian? A very, quite an analytical sort of a guy, really. I can imagine you having that conversation with him.
Yeah, he was 100% needing that. It wasn't about what he earned. It was about what were his opportunities, where was the club going to go, what could he achieve there. And that was where, we had this sort of 5-year plan that gets talked about. And, he was happy to come in at what would be, no doubt about it, the highest paid championship coach, but would be the lowest paid Super League coach. So he was happy to invest in that and back himself. And then, it's grown from that, and the success has been tremendous. And because of that relationship and the solidarity within it and the belief from both parties in each other, even though in terms of where we sat when we redid his deal was, a couple of wins from 15, 16 games, whatever it were, it was never about that or a concern. And as much as there was noise from Hull and over in the NRL, it was never really a factor for him. It was just about us dealing with what we needed to internally.
Absolutely. I mean, in the last 2 years, Derek, Leigh have played at Tottenham, and you've played at Wembley. Both fantastic occasions, and you obviously must have, it must have been incredible for you as a club owner to see that unfolding. I suppose, especially given now that you're a Manchester United fan, there's one obvious venue where Leigh would like to for sure. appear. I don't know whether it'll happen this year, but presumably at some point in the future, that's your aim.
Yeah, without a doubt, that's the one. I mean, one thing that was really a moment for me, and I was keen to try and get it encapsulated on a picture, which I did, was I don't think it'll be repeated. Number one, because I think it's a real tough ask for someone to get promoted out of the Championship, having won the 1895 Cup, into Super League and win the Challenge Cup. Yeah. So, that's one thing. But secondly, because it's now played after it meant that we could hold that trophy as the 1895 and win the Challenge Cup and still be the oldest until technically the other game had finished, and that was the first time. So I managed to get a picture of holding both those trophies.
Can we get hold of that picture? Because we'd like to put that on this, on this podcast.
I'll share it with you. I had that done in the changing rooms before my wife goes and hands it out. And being the sponsor of that tournament as well was also great. Having won it at Tottenham ironically, I had this dream that I'd walk my team out at Wembley, and then when we got to Wembley, it was actually Tottenham, not Wembley. So I was like, it still could be the Challenge Cup then, and of course that turned out to be. But the ultimate dream now is to walk out at Old Trafford, and that's a goal that we I don't mind sharing, we set at the beginning of this year, and it doesn't look too great at the moment, but it isn't something we've given up on either.
Well, the season's certainly not over, is it? So
no.
There's still plenty of time, and you only need to get into the top 6 to have a chance of getting
there. Yeah.
So
and we've got a season, of course, that I was talking to Adrian the other day, and the best clubs, like your Wiggins, that have the juniors coming through, and the next one in is great, and the one B, all that's great, is, that conveyor belt that you need to produce over time gives you that sort of robust stability.
Yeah.
Something we don't have. So those clubs will have very limited change at the end of each year and have consistency. Unfortunately, which makes it more difficult for Adrian each time, is we're having a big turnover of players, and that's going to come over time. So we've got a similar thing at the end of this year. What's key is that we try and ensure that we keep improving as a group. Now, in this year, we have got players that I won't comment on that won't be with us next year for whatever reasons. The one is out there is obviously our captain, John. But what happens, what you can use that for, is as you've seen with the fight against Catalans, the fight against Salford, the fight against OKR away, albeit we didn't win, the determination and resilience in defence. That's a group that's very much fighting for something. So I liken it to Leeds back in the day when Maguire went to KR, Sinfield retired, Peacock retired, and so on. And they just limped into the playoffs. And I think in 5th place and won the grand final from
in 2017.
Because they galvanised to finish strong.
Absolutely.